Alright, boys. Time for another compilation. We got the entire second season of my Tales from the Drive-Thru series. Now, Season 1 of Tales from the Drive-Thru was mostly about my experiences working at McDonald's. This is more broad than that and just kind of expanded to me in other jobs. But it kept the title because that was the name of the series. Season 2 had a lot of gaps in between episodes. It went on for like 6 years almost, so the way that seasons are determined for Tales from the Drive-Thru is episode count. 15 episodes a season. Let's just jump in.
You're watching Fugitive Red-Eye, and welcome to another exciting episode of Tales from the Drive-Thru. This is the start of Season 2 of Tales from the Drive-Thru. Because it's been so long, I felt the series could use a little bit of tweaking. In Season 1, I pretty much exclusively talked about my time working in the fast food industry. In Season 2, that is still something I may talk about in episodes, but I only have so many stories with those experiences. So to help broaden up Season 2, I've decided to include my other jobs as things that I can tell stories of. Today I'll be talking about the second job I had, which was actually the job just before I worked in fast food. And as you can tell from the title, I'm talking about my time working as a newspaper carrier. Now, my time working for the newspaper agency, I only worked there for about 3 months. And as such, this will most likely only be a one-off episode. So, delivering newspapers, I had to get up at around 2 in the morning and head over to the newspaper depot. Then I had to get the papers ready, get out, and have them all delivered by 6 a.m. However, on top of having that time constraint, I also had certain things where people had requested they're delivered by 5:30 or something because they have to be to work. The only problem with that is that kind of slows down the route because I gotta go to those houses first if I don't want them to complain. Now, with the policy there, you're allowed 1 complaint for every 1,000 papers, and anything over that, you lose $2 from your check from every complaint. Which may not sound like a lot, but since you're only getting paid 5 cents to 10 cents a paper, depending on the day of the week, that can be hell. Especially since the truck that delivered the papers to the depot was often late. My boss there was actually really cool, though, because he took the fall most of the times we got complaints. I think part of the reason he did that is because they're constantly losing carriers there. Now, I didn't work the route completely alone. I actually worked with my brother, and we delivered the papers together and split the checks. Because of this, on average, I usually got around $100 for every 2 weeks. And even that's being generous. Sometimes I'd get more, depending on how many Sundays there were in a month. Sometimes there was a little bit more, but, because Sunday papers are bigger. But I still didn't mind, because that was a lot more money than I made working in the greenhouse, which is the job I had before that. But that's another story for another day. Anyway, the fun thing about the paper route is you got to drive around and throw papers at people's houses. It's pretty hard to fuck it up other than being late with the deliveries. But the customers were really hostile. In fact, the reason we ended up leaving is because some guy pulled a gun on us because he didn't know what we were doing, even though I told him, hey, we're delivering newspapers. Then there was this old bitch that she got mad about my car being too loud or something, so we couldn't pull into her driveway direct. So I'd pull off down the street and she'd still keep complaining. At the time, I was driving a really beat-up car. She said that I had a manual transmission with no muffler, which neither was true. It was an automatic car, and it had a muffler, it just wasn't very good. Other interesting things that happened was there was a neighborhood that had houses filled with mannequins, and it was creepy as shit. And there was this single house gated community, like it was a personal gated community this person had just for their big-ass house. And they had, like, their own little forest that had trees that I swear to God look like those ones you see in Fuji Forest. They're all deformed and creepy. Of course, the reason I ended up leaving the route was because, eventually a guy pulled a gun on us. And I shit you not, this happened. So we were driving around. It was around 4:30 in the morning, I think, is when this happened. But this guy sees us, and it's in this condo complex for old people. And this guy's like, what are you guys doing? I'm like, delivering newspapers. He's like, oh, okay. And then Snowman, who was working the route with me, steps out of the car and begins to walk towards the house to put the paper there. And the guy, like, reaches for his gun and starts to pull it out. But then he sees the newspaper in his hand and puts it back. At that point, we're like, we can't keep this up. All the customers are hostile. There's that old bitch who bitches about my car all the time. We got motherfuckers pulling guns on us, and we got those old people that complain if they don't get their paper early, even though if we want to get to them early, we have to, like, rearrange the route and do it out of order. We're losing $2 for every paper that we get a complaint after 1 complaint per 1,000 papers, and it just really wasn't worth it, especially since a lot of the times the reasons we were late was the truck that delivers the papers to the depot was just too fucking slow. Granted, when it was like that, my boss would typically take the fall and take the hit for the complaints, but sometimes he couldn't. Not to mention I already had to split my check with Snowman because we were both working the route together, so we were splitting the check. There are things I miss about that job, for sure. I miss driving around recklessly and throwing papers at people's houses. I remember when people pissed me off, I used to, when I was driving, I'd kind of drag the paper along the ground as I'm driving so that the plastic would kind of tear. So then I'd set the paper on their porch, and then when they'd pick it up, the paper would fall out. Because I'd do it in such a way that it was impossible for it not to fall out once they picked it up normally. Which I'll admit was kind of a dick move, but I only did it to those customers who I really didn't like and really didn't like me. That was technically my second job. Fast food was my third. And I've had a couple others since. You want to hear about my first job? Stay tuned for the next episode of Tales from the Drive-Thru, Tales from the Greenhouse. This has been Fugitive Red-Eye with another Tales from the Drive-Thru, and you have a great day.
Subscribe the Fugitive Red-Eye.
You're watching Fugitive Red-Eye, and welcome to another episode of Tales from the Drive-Thru, the series where I talk about my many experiences in the workplace. Today I'm going to be talking about my first job, working in a greenhouse. This was back when I was around 14 years old and couldn't really technically have a real job in this state, but this was actually a school job that also gave me science credit, so I think since it technically counted as a class too, there was some sort of loophole there. This counted as 2 separate class periods in middle school, so I actually got to miss first and second period to go to work. As I said, I did get science credit for this as well. The pay sucked. They said they paid you based on how much work you actually did, but the most I ever got there was $45 for a month, which to me was a lot at the time, but I realize how terrible that is now. They also gave us $1 every Friday to either use on the vending machines or keep for ourselves. My duties there consisted of mixing soil, potting plants, transplanting plants, fertilizing plants, cleaning up the greenhouse, things like that. But a lot of the times when it was too cold to go out to the greenhouse, we'd watch movies. Earlier in the year, we started with watching plant-related movies that were educational, but the more and more the year went on, the lazier they got with that, and we almost never went out in the greenhouse after it got to a certain point in the year. And we just started watching whatever the hell they felt like. We watched the movie Honey with Jessica Alba, which fucking sucked. We watched White Fang, which I actually really liked. And we watched a few Disney movies, I can't remember which ones. But it was a really easy job, to be fair, and what I would do when I got paid is I'd take the money I got, I'd go down to the gas station that I'd walk down to, because I couldn't drive yet, and I'd just buy Slurpees and stuff. It was fun. It was a fun first job. It was a lot of fun. Like I said, it was really more of a science class than a job itself, but I got paid for it even though it was very minuscule pay. And since it was a school job, once the school year ended, my work ended as well. But working in the greenhouse, we also did do a few projects where we'd take stuff home to our families, like we grew some poinsettias that we got to take home, and we grew some aloe vera that we got to take home, things like that. Obviously, the greenhouse sold the plants that we would work on, but like I said, the pay was very minuscule, but it wasn't bad. I had a lot of fun doing it, and it counted for science credit, and it got me out of 2 classes at school. There were brief days where they would teach us stuff about plants and stuff, especially towards the beginning of the year where they'd come in, we'd take some tests on the whiteboard and stuff. I remember one of my coworkers tried to cheat off my paper, so I wrote down a bunch of wrong answers, and he wrote them down too, so it was kind of funny. And then I changed all mine to the correct answers. I was kind of a dick. There was also a coworker I had there, and classmate, because like I said, it functioned as both a class and a job, that was obsessed with Talladega Nights because it had just come out, and so every time I'd come in, he'd hold his fist up and go, "Shake and bake!" And I didn't get the reference because I hadn't seen the movie, and I didn't see it until years later, so it was a fun first job. Not a lot of funny things happened like did with the other ones, because this lasted 1 school year, and we really didn't do a whole lot of crazy stuff, but it was alright, and I think that about does it. Sorry for this shorter episode, but that's really all I have to say about the greenhouse. On a side note, though, I am planning to do a viewer stories episode, so you want to submit them in the comments, this would be the place to do it, or on my Facebook, Twitter, Minds, or email. Let me know your experiences, whether it be as a customer, as an employee, in fast food, or any other workplace experience that you think would be entertaining to tell. And if I like it, I will, of course, be having it in a future episode. Viewer tales. I already have one submitted from Rabid Waffles that I'm going to be using. When you do post your viewer tales, let me know how you want me to credit you. Do you want me to use your username? If your username is your first and last name, let me know if you want me to use your full name, or just use your first name, or just use your last name, or if you want me to call you something completely different. Anyway, this has been Fugitive Red-Eye, and I'll see you next time.
Subscribe the Fugitive Red-Eye.
You're watching Fugitive Red-Eye, and welcome to another episode of Tales from the Drive-Thru. God damn, has it been a while since I've done one of these. And today I'm going to be taking it back to the classic format, where I talk specifically about something at my time working in fast food. Today I'm going to be telling another story of a specific customer. This lady came through around breakfast time. So to start off with, she tried to order some non-breakfast food, which obviously we didn't have during breakfast time. She got really upset about that, but she still ordered some breakfast food nonetheless. Now, if you don't know, a lot of the times when you go through a drive-thru, and there's a line behind you, a lot of the times they will park you if your food takes a little bit longer to cook. Especially where I was working, because they had a timer that we weren't supposed to have people sitting at the window for too long, so if it was too long, we would have them park regardless if there was a line or not. So this lady came, she ordered her food, and we parked her. She seemed a little bit upset when we first told her we didn't have non-breakfast items, and then she got even more upset when we had to park her. So about maybe 5 minutes later, which admittedly is a pretty long time to be waiting, because that's actually considered a long time where I worked. We're not supposed to have a customer there for that long unless they're like cooking chicken or something like that, and even then we didn't have chicken because it was breakfast time, so Anyway, after about 5 minutes, the lady came inside, understandably a little bit upset, and she was complaining, and basically she was offered a refund, but she didn't want that. She just wanted the food then and there, and she broke down in tears, believe it or not. It was really surprising. She just started crying and bawling her eyes out, saying that she just wanted her breakfast. It was really bizarre. So I walked up to her and tried to, say, we can try to get it out as quickly as we can. I tried to be as, nice as I could. I thought it was really weird. She was crying, so it was kind of hard to sympathize. But then later on, she started getting into, how she was, dealing with some shit or something in her personal life. She was mad at her boyfriend or something like that, and that's why she was upset. It was just a really bizarre and uncomfortable experience because she was, really, really into it. Another interesting little story. This is going to be one of those multiple story episodes, I guess. Another interesting little story. When I went out into the lobby to carry out a tray of food to a family of customers that was sitting there, I walked in when they were giving a blessing on their food, they were praying and stuff like that. So it was really, really awkward, just because, it was a public place and I was walking up to them and I felt really weird walking up to them. So I saw that. I actually turned the corner, waited probably about a minute and a half, and then went back out because I just did not want to deal with that. It was really awkward. That's all I really have for today, kind of a shorter episode. I've actually got another one planned probably for sometime next week, actually. And I also have another episode planned where I plan on doing viewer tales. I have one submitted already by Rabid Waffles. If you want to submit a viewer tale, you can either submit it in the comments down below or on my Twitter, Minds, or Facebook. Facebook is the one of those three that I check the most. The comments I check just as often. I will, however, check my other platforms as well if you want to submit it there. But anyway, this has been Fugitive Red Eye, and have a great rest of the day.
Subscribe to Fugitive Red Eye.
You're watching Fugitive Red Eye, and welcome to another episode of Tales from the Drive-Thru, the series where I talk about my many exploits within the workplace. Today's episode, I'll be talking about a job I had for all of a week. Yeah, it was something else, I'll tell you that. So, for context, at the time I was working in a call center and wanted to get the hell out of there because I was getting really sick of the call center because they were cracking down on a bunch of stuff that was really petty and didn't matter. They were introducing a bunch of new policies, and they were removing departments, which made it much more difficult to deal with customers because our department was not trained for a lot of things, but that's another story for another day. So, because of all that, I was trying to get out of the call center, but I was doing it a very smart way, I think. I was sort of testing the water with a few new jobs to see what would stick, and eventually that did end up getting me into the job I'm in today. However, at the time, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, and was trying almost anything to get out of there. I didn't really try a whole lot of jobs, but the first one I tried was a door-to-door surveyor, quote-unquote. Now, what that job entailed was I was basically going and knocking on people's doors and asking them if they were interested in solar panels. I was doing this for a solar company. I won't mention which one because I technically signed a non-disclosure agreement on it, so I can't. But the way this particular company was run was really bad. For instance, we were brought in and we were trained by this guy. We'll call him Bill. So this Bill guy acts really nice and acts like he's your best bud. He tells you, oh, you're going to be making $14 an hour, no matter what. $14 an hour guaranteed. They tell you that right up at the start. Then they tell you, by the way, you're going to be able to make all these incentives if you get past your goals and you basically go above and beyond. You're going to be making a lot more money than that. At the time of this, a friend of mine was also going for the job, and in fact, he's the one who referred me to them, and we were both training together. Now, this solar company was a little bit shady, to say the least. So first off, there's this Bill guy, right? And you go into his office and you see that there's all these, like, psychology books on how to basically manipulate people. And right off the bat, I felt, he was kind of trying to do that on us, and he definitely was. But the next red flag I got was the training was not paid for. We trained for 2 days, and those days were unpaid. Now, granted, that's only 2 days, but still, it's bullshit it was unpaid. And of course, during the training, they tell us, hey, we're going to have these quotas that you have to meet. Basically, you have to set a total of 12 appointments, and 4 of those 12 have to actually buy the panels. So the way it worked is we'd have to set up appointments for a salesman to go out and try and sell them the panels. We had to create 12 appointments, and 4 of them had to go through to meet the quotas. Now, this is per week. However, he said since we were new to the job, don't worry too much about the quotas, it's not a big deal, you'll still get your hourly pay, no big deal, no harm, no foul. I'm like, alright, maybe it'll get easier as time goes on. So, after a few days of actually going out in the field, knocking on the doors, I set, I think, maybe 1 or 2 appointments the first couple of days, and that was like all I set at all in the entire week I worked there. But the thing is they don't keep record of the appointments correctly, so they don't actually log that you actually got credit for the appointment, so you won't technically meet the quota even if you do. I know this because my friend tested it using a controlled situation where he set it to go to his friend's house for an appointment, and they did not log that the appointment happened, even though we know it did. So that's another bit of bullshit there. They don't give you proper credit when you're supposed to get it. Now, obviously the friend didn't end up buying the solar panels, but you still should get credit for the appointment, just not for the sale. And after a couple of days in, they brought in the owner of the company, and he started giving us this big speech about how we had to knock on doors in a specific way. Basically, you do 3 knocks, ring the doorbell, 3 knocks, which I thought was complete and total bullshit, because that just sounds annoying and persistent to me if someone does that to me. Not to mention, he tried to tell me that we were not soliciting because we weren't salesmen, but that's bullshit because he clearly didn't know that solicit does not mean sale. If you're unfamiliar with what soliciting is, it's literally just going out and asking someone for something, which is exactly what we were doing. We were asking them if they were interested in the panels. We were soliciting an appointment out of them. Sure, we weren't selling the panels directly, but we were selling them on an idea. And technically, legally, we were still solicitors. So when we went to doors with no solicitors, I just logged them as no solicitors and didn't even bother knocking. Well, the owner of the company was not happy about this and wanted us to actually knock on those doors and try them, and I'm like, no, fuck that. In fact, after that meeting, I quit working that job altogether. Granted, I finished out that week so I could get a full week's pay, but after that, I was done. The next really shady thing hit me when I actually got the paycheck. It was much, much smaller than I was expecting. Because I logged all my hours, and I should have gotten quite a bit more than I did. I don't remember the exact number, but basically what it came down to is I was getting drastically less than I thought, over $100 less. Well, later on, after I had left that company, my friend started noticing that he was not getting that much money, and he confronted them about it, and they said, well, you're not actually getting the 14 because you're not making the quotas. So what actually ended up happening is they were only paying him 10 per hour, and they were only paying me 10 per hour as well, which was a lie because they claimed we'd get the 14 no matter what. Now, they later went on to say, well, it was in the contract you signed, which I read through it, and I did not see anything about that, so unless it was in really fine print that I couldn't even see using a magnifying glass, they're full of shit and they're lying. On top of that, they intentionally didn't train us on stuff that we could answer questions. Like, when people would ask us questions about shit, we were just encouraged to have the salesman come out and explain it to them. Because that way the salesman can try to make the sale while they're answering their questions. They would intentionally not give us the answers, because that way they would be more enticed to have a salesman come out and answer their questions. They also didn't call them salesmen, they called them consultants, which was incredibly misleading as well. And again, I can't exactly mention which one their company name was, but I will say that their company name was incredibly similar to a much more well-known company name, so I feel like they were trying to backpack off the success of the other one. Because if I look up the company name for the one that I worked for, I usually just find the other company. The one that I worked for is like the 4th or 5th option down. And after a while, my friend was like, well, if I'm only making 10 per hour without the quotas, I'm just not going to do the actual work. So what he did is ended up just logging his hours in the thing and setting up markings as if he'd been going to houses and just turning off the location on his phone so they can't track that he wasn't actually going. So, he's like, hey, if they're going to fuck me over, I'm going to fuck them over. And you know what? I don't blame him. Rather than that, I quit and just went and got another job. And as I said, in the meantime, I still had the call center job because I didn't fully quit my job until I actually had one that was a sure thing that I was going to stay with. Other than the company itself, people were assholes. Granted, I admit being a door-to-door, like knocking on doors, bothering people is really annoying, and I get that. But I remember this one lady sent her fucking dog out at us. Like, it's just this little harmless fucking dog, but it's like, come on, bitch, why would you do that? That is just awful to do to a person. And then there was this one old man who, we went to his house, and apparently he already had solar panels, and he wouldn't shut the fuck up about how solar panels are a scam, and he was telling us, oh, you need to get out of that business because it's a scam. I'm like, okay, well, I'll see you later. And, like, basically his bitch wife just kept talking to us, and at that point, I just decided to fuck right back with them because they kept frustrating me. Now, granted, I'll admit, like I said, going door to door to someone isn't a pleasant thing to do, and I would never do it again, because I find it incredibly annoying, and I personally don't like it. But I'm always respectful when people come to my door. I just tell them, hey, I'm not interested. Please put me on your no-call list if you have one. But this old man kept ripping into us and acting like we were the worst people that existed, so I got fed up with it. And I'm like, well, the panels you purchased, did you get them through our company? And he's like, what the fuck does that matter? It's all the same thing. Get the fuck off my property. And then his bitch wife just kept shouting at us and saying things and acting like she wanted to keep talking to us. I'm like, well, which is it? Do you want to keep talking to us or do you want us to leave? At which point, I just walked away and let the bitch keep talking. Like I said, it was a bitch thing. It's a dick thing to go knocking on people's door. I think it's an asshole thing to do. But there's no reason to attack me and my friend for something we had nothing to do with, and to continue berating us until the point where I get fed up with it. Granted, like I said, me being a snarky little asshole and coming back at him with that comment, I expected him to get mad. And had I just started out with that, when him saying he already had them and didn't like them, I would have expected to get fucking socked in the face and totally deserved it. But the only reason I was being so snarky and fucking malicious with him is because of the way he was being with me at the beginning. But yeah, that's a lesson I can give to everyone. Do not do a door-to-door job. I never wanted to in the first place, but my friend's like, hey, let's try it out at the very least. I'm like, you know what, I'll try it, because I wanted to get out of the call center. But like I said, I only lasted at that job a week, and I got paid for it. Not very much, but hey, I got paid for it, and it was a learning experience. Anyway, this has been Fugitive Red Eye, and you have a great rest of the day.
Subscribe to Fugitive Red Eye.
You're watching Fugitive Red Eye, and welcome to another episode of Tales from the Drive-Thru, the series where I talk about my many exploits in the workplace. And today we're going back to the drive-thru itself, back to when I worked in the fast food industry, for quite possibly the most exciting thing that ever happened to me while I worked there. Now, there's a reason I haven't told this story before, and I'll get into it later, but it's definitely one for the books. It's something interesting. So, it was a normal day. I was working on my manager, who we refer to as Rimmer's shift, and one of our regular customers came through. Now, this regular customer was a bit of a shady guy. He always had a lot of duffel bags in his back seat. You never know exactly what it was. And he always seemed a bit off, but we always just kind of brushed it off. Well, one day I was working the night shift, and this guy came in, and I could see that his shirt had some strange stains on it, some red stains. I wasn't exactly sure what to think of it, but he ordered his Big Mac like he always did, and he ordered it with extra sauce, as always. So then he went and sat down and started eating his Big Mac, but he then requested that we give him his liver and onions, which I didn't know what the hell he was talking about, because obviously we don't sell liver and onions in fast food. So when he asked for the liver and onions, I was a bit thrown off, but nevertheless, it was still something that I was like, sir, we don't serve that. And he's like, oh yeah, sorry, wrong restaurant. But anyway, I look back, and he has his duffel bag sitting next to him at the table, and I can see into the duffel bag, and in it is just a bunch of money. I don't know why, it's odd. To make a long story short, after he finished his meal, he came up to the register, and he pulled out a gun. Like, this is not a joke. He pulled out an actual gun. And he started demanding all the money in the register. Of course, procedure is we're supposed to give him all the money in the register, so I started doing that. But then, I thought now was my chance. So we have this little safe on the floor. It's real heavy, motherfucker, hard to lift. And I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna try and stop this. So I pick up this safe, and I chuck it at the guy, and it knocks him over. Well, that knocked him unconscious, so we immediately called the police. While he was unconscious, the police searched through his duffel bag and found several fake passports and a bunch of pictures of women that had gone missing in the area. And to make a long story short, this guy was actually a serial killer. And if it wasn't for me picking up this heavy safe on the floor and throwing it at him, this guy would have gone on to kill many more people. So far, he has over 600 confirmed victims and is actually being put to death in about 10 years. So, I feel pretty proud of myself being a hero and stopping a serial killer. But you may be wondering, I mentioned earlier that there wasn't a reason for telling this story before. And obviously that reason is because this is all an April Fool's joke because of what today is. And if you believed any of this, there's clearly something wrong with you because this is probably one of the stupidest things I've made up just on the spot. So let me know exactly when you found out in the video that this was fake. Because obviously none of it happened. But anyway, this is Fugitive Red Eye. You have a great day.
Subscribe to Fugitive Red Eye.
You're watching Fugitive Red-Eye, and welcome to another episode of Tales from the Drive-Thru. Yeah, I know, it has been a while since I've done one of these. The last one I did was over a year ago, because it was April 1st of last year, and then this year for April 1st I did something else. But here's a real episode, one that's actually true. But yeah, Tales from the Drive-Thru, if you're unfamiliar, since it has been a while, is my series where I talk about my various exploits in the work industry. Sometimes as a customer, sometimes as an employee. Today we're talking about as an employee, and we'll be talking about when I worked in a call center. And we'll specifically be talking about a coworker I had working in that call center. So, you meet a lot of interesting people in the call center business, both over the phone and with the people you work with. I plan on doing some more episodes about customers that I had to deal with in the future, but this is about a coworker. So, in my training group, there was quite a lot of people that actually didn't make it on to become full-time over-the-phone agents. I worked tech support over the phone in that call center. And one of the guys that didn't make it through training because he got in trouble was this man who... He has a common enough name, so we'll just keep his first name, James. He was a black man in his 50s, about no hair, glasses, always wearing clothes that are trying to look nice, but feel like they're like bargain bin versions of nice clothes. Always used to like to brag about how he bought his clothes at the DI and Savers, which are both thrift stores. But James was an interesting chap, like I said. Older guy in his 50s. Apparently he had some kids of his own. And we'll get to that in a minute, because he had some interesting stuff that he said about that. But he was a very strange man. Constantly spouting complete and utter nonsense and telling stories that don't go anywhere. I should also mention that although his name was James, he always said, "My name is James, but everybody calls me KJ," which is not true. Nobody fucking called him KJ. And the reason he called himself KJ was fucking stupid. It was literally some We Was Kang shit. Like, the K stood for king. He's like, well, you know, in Africa, we would have been kings. Fuck off. Just fuck off with that shit. I don't care. He would also spout a bunch of stuff about, like, your third eye and your power of the third eye and all this stuff you could use if you could channel it. And then he'd, like, have all these weird, like, theories and shit he'd spout off. I don't remember most of them, in all honesty, because a lot of what he said was just complete and total non sequitur. He didn't make any sense most of the time. He would constantly talk as if he was a pimp. I don't believe that he was, but he did always kind of wear that kind of garb, like the very colorful clothes, which again, he bought at thrift stores. The big earrings, the glasses, the hats, which we didn't allow hats at the call center, so he actually had to take it off. In the call center we worked at, for the first little while I worked there, we were supposed to wear ties with our uniform. And he's like, could I wear a bow tie? And my trainer's like, well, I mean, I'd fight for it. You know, I'd argue it. It's like, okay. But then, like, his reasoning is because Malcolm X wore a bow tie. He was very, very, like, kind of black supremacist in his views, this James guy was. Very much so. But he was really weird. Like, he would constantly, like, hit on the female employees and ask them shit like, so when are we gonna date? And then later on, it turned out, like, he was... And he also used to sell gumbo on company property. I bought some of his gumbo once. It was decent, but, like, from what I understand, it's bitch-ass gumbo compared to some of the shit you get down in Louisiana, which is apparently where he was from. But the shit he was making, from what I understand, is nothing compared to, like, real authentic gumbo. Like, it was alright, though. I enjoyed it. It had, like, crab meat and, like, rice and stuff in it, but, like... Which, again, I've heard isn't necessarily how gumbo is usually made, but I don't know enough about gumbo to be an authority on that. But it was tasty enough. But I only ever bought one bowl from him because he charged like $10 a bowl. And it was a small-ass bowl. And he was like, oh yeah, I get up at 4 a.m. every morning to make gumbo so I can sell it here. But then it turned out gumbo wasn't the only thing he was selling on company property, and this is where he ran himself into trouble. So as I said, he was constantly being really creepy with the female employees, which were all very much younger than him. I mean, granted, they were all of age, so whatever, but they were definitely younger than him, young enough to be his daughter, for sure. Because apparently he had an adult-age daughter. Anyway, he would constantly flirt with them and, you know, say, oh, you were on the corner, and shit like that, and, like, basically insinuate they were prostitutes. And he had this thing he used to always say where he'd be like, I can't be your daddy, but I can be your daddy. Like, again, very, very, very weird sense of humor he had. Like, I found it funny just because, again, this guy was fucking losing it. He was not the brightest. But, He also, like I said, wasn't only selling the Gumbo and Company property, he was also selling, apparently, OxyContin and counterfeit purses. And that's where he got in trouble. And that's why he didn't finish training. Apparently they didn't call the police on him. They just, fired him. And then he showed up later on and kept selling Gumbo and Company property for a while before they eventually told him to fuck off. But he'd constantly just say the name Donald Trump. He wouldn't even say anything about the man. Granted, this was pre-election. This was, the year leading up to the election. So it was, late 2015, early 2016. And he would just randomly throw Trump's name into his sentences for no reason at all and not have any context to it. Anytime anyone said anything vaguely bad, he'd be like, oh, Donald Trump. And it's not even something that, it's not even something that the most skewed view of Trump would even say. It was very just, oh, Donald, oh, there was a drug dealer that got arrested the other day. Oh, Donald Trump. It was really fucking weird. He would just say his name randomly. I don't get it. I don't care what you think of the guy. That's not what this is about. Just randomly throwing his name into sentences or as a response to something does not make fucking sense. Yeah, it's a very odd group. James was definitely the weird one of the group, though. For all I know, James is still out there selling his Gumbo and randomly saying Donald Trump without actually having it mean anything. And talking about the power of his third eye. But there was also a story one time that he said that he claimed that this guy had his daughter sitting on his lap, and then he held the gun to his head and told him not to do that, which I don't believe any of that. I think he was just trying to sound tough. But yeah, James, fucking weird guy. Definitely one of the most interesting people in training. But yeah, that's all I have to say. But yeah, that's all I have for this episode of Tales from the Drive-Thru. Been a while, but here it is. Have a good one. You're watching Fugitive Red-Eye, and welcome to another exciting episode of Tales from the Drive-Thru, the series where I talk about my various experiences working in the workplace. Today's story comes from my current job, which is something I wouldn't normally do, but it's about a person who no longer works there. So this guy, we'll call him Oingo, because I fucking hate the Oingo Boingo brothers from JoJo, so we'll just call him Oingo for that. So this guy Oingo, he was really fucking skinny, had no weight on him. He was a pretty edgy guy, or at least he tried to be, was constantly cracking offensive jokes. I mean, I'm not above offensive jokes myself, I make plenty of them. This guy was kind of a tryhard with them. And would constantly try to insert them into everything. He was kind of tall and scrawny. He was really pale. He always came to work with a trench coat jacket almost, a black wife beater shirt, camo military pants, and these Naruto type ninja shoes that were really bad for working in a warehouse, which is what we do. He would constantly talk about how he liked to write doujin. If you don't know what doujin is, it's basically fan manga. Oftentimes there's typically a sexual or hentai connotation to them. And throughout the course of time, I found out that the type of doujin he liked to write were yaoi doujin, which basically meant this guy wrote gay hentai. In addition to that, he was always just kind of uncomfortable to be around. If you remember my friend Al, who I've talked about a few times on this channel, one time wore this shirt with an anime girl on it, and this guy Oingo reaches over the conveyor belt and grabs his shirt because it has tits on it, and he goes boop. He groped the anime girl on Al's shirt. He's just that was really fucking weird. And it was almost like he had kind of a thing for Al because he followed him around. There was one time he followed him into the bathroom and just kind of talked to him about Berserk. That was the other thing, is he was really into asking if we'd seen Berserk, and he was upset that we hadn't. He followed Al into the bathroom one time, and, he looked over at him while Al was taking a piss, and he's like, yo, dude, you seen Berserk? He went in there to take a shit, too, but it's he had to fucking go in there, fucking stand up right next to him and make eye contact and be like, hey, dude, you seen Berserk? And it was, all the time he'd say that. Every day you'd hear him ask that. And it's no, we haven't seen Berserk since the 5 seconds you last asked. Fucking chill. Whenever he'd leave our workspace to go to the bathroom or do whatever, he'd always say some weird shit. One time he's oh, I gotta go wipe my ass. Which I thought maybe he had some sort of bowel problem and he had to do it and he was just open about that, but I think he might have just been joking again. But he would constantly say weird shit when he'd do it. He'd be oh, I gotta go charge my laser. It wasn't funny. It was dumb. I remember the first thing he ever said to me. Again, I'm pretty sure this was just him trying to be edgy. We were working together in a trailer, and he's like, let me tell you something, dude. Racism exists for a reason. Because he had just gotten done working in a trailer with a bunch of Hispanics that didn't really speak that much English, and I think he didn't like that, and so he was telling me about that.
And I'll admit the particular coworkers he was talking about are people that I do not like, and I completely understand not wanting to work with. Not because they don't speak much English, because they actually speak a decent amount of English. They just like to talk Spanish most of the time because they're shit talkers and like to insult people. And I can typically understand when they're shit talking because, Spanish shit talking is something I do understand. They are assholes, so I'll give them that. But it was just, I was like, oh, okay. And he was just kind of very weird and awkward to be around most of the time. Like, there was one time when Al was climbing up the step ladder to the platform on the tower that we work on sometimes, and he sneaks up behind him and starts shoving this metal pole up to the back of his pant leg, and he's like, and Al turned around and said, fucking stop that, because it was really fucking weird. I don't know why this guy did half the shit he did. He was just a bizarre person to be around. It was really uncomfortable. Again, he just had this obsession with us seeing Berserk, which honestly is part of why I put off watching it for a while. And then, after I started watching it, I loved it. But he did not help me in wanting to watch it to begin with. But yeah, this guy was fucking weird, and he was not fun to be around. And, he was quiet a lot of the time, but then other times he'd randomly say something. Again, I think just to try to be edgy a lot of the time. But he wasn't particularly funny. He was just kind of lame and kind of a tryhard of that. And he was pretty proud of his yaoi fanfics that he wrote, so there's that. But yeah, that's all I really have to say about this boy Oingo. He was not fun, and he doesn't work there anymore. And he took his ninja shoes and his fucking stolen valor pants and took them elsewhere. But yeah, that's the story of Oingo. See you next time.
I'm gonna fucking die here, Jack!
You're watching Fugitive Red-Eye, and welcome to another episode of Tales from the Drive-Thru, the series where I talk about my many adventures, exploits, and outings in the workplace. Today I'll be talking about a classic and going back to the drive-thru itself. And today I'll be talking about my trusty iPod, something that I was inseparable from at the time. Essentially, this iPod was one that my brother had got used. He bought it from someone on a local equivalent to Craigslist. It's not Craigslist, but it's a similar thing, but it's more local. After he bought it, he loaded it up with a bunch of stuff, used it for a while until he got a newer one. And once my brother got a newer one, he gave me his old one. So then I had that. And it had a lot of great things on it. It had a Manga Storm, which is an app you can no longer get. It's one that he actually paid for, believe it or not. And so I had a lot of manga on that. That's where I first read Violence Jack. I actually read Violence Jack between classes when I was in my first semester of college. I read a little bit on it, and I read through all that was available at the time, which at the time was up to the El Dorado arc. So far, more has definitely been translated. In fact, even the ending has been translated. But there's still some chunks of the middle that have not, last I checked, which admittedly was a couple months ago. In addition to that, there were games on it. There was this game called Call of Mini Zombies, which I actually deleted from it. Because it would constantly give you notifications saying, "Your chainsaw thirsts for blood." It has an old version of YouTube on it where the icon was just an old TV rather than actually having the YouTube logo. And I used that as long as I could, although the version of the app that's that outdated no longer works. In fact, it stopped working long before my iPod broke, which we'll get into in a little bit. But it was with that YouTube app that I would listen to music while I was at work in the back window of the drive-thru. Technically, they had a no headphones, no speakers, no music policy, no electronic devices whatsoever, as most fast food places tend to. But they didn't really enforce it, as most fast food places don't tend to. So, I would always have my iPod back there. Now, I didn't have headphones, and I didn't have a speaker. So, what I would do is an old trick that everyone did there if they didn't have either of those. You grab an empty cup, and you put the iPod in there, and it sort of creates this sort of acoustic cone that, pushes the sound out towards you. I think that's how that works, but anyway, it makes it louder. So I would do that, and I would listen to all sorts of things. The music on the iPod, as well as going on YouTube and listening to, the Dragon Ball Z soundtrack and things like that. I'd always have my iPod on me, and I would also use it in my car ride to and from work. It has a ton of music on it, and that's why I always loved having it. And I didn't have a smartphone, because as I've mentioned multiple times, I didn't have a smartphone until 2017. Part of the reason for that is because I had my trusty old iPod. It was a Generation 2 iPod Touch. So very old, at least by now. And it was even outdated by the time I was using it, but I didn't care because I use a lot of outdated shit. So I just had that, and then I had my flip phone. You could actually text from my iPod. I actually put a text app on it. that I let my friend use because he didn't have a cell phone. So I let him use it whenever I wasn't using the iPod. I'd let him use the text app on that. And it was that same friend that I got a job there that I talked about in a previous episode. And he'd come in, 8 hours early along with me because, he didn't have any other way to get to work, and he was actually staying with me for a while. So I'd drive him to work. I'd hand him the iPod, and he'd go out and play with it for, several hours. Granted, this was later on, so, obviously I didn't use it as much because he was using it. But when his shift would start, I'd take it back. And it wasn't always 9 hours. Sometimes it was only 4 hours or a couple hours that he'd have to wait. But the point is, as soon as he'd start the shift, he'd hand it back to me. And then he'd just sit there drinking refill after refill of coffee while he used my iPod playing the games on it, air hockey and Brisk Saber. I don't know if anyone remembers Brisk Saber, but it was a Star Wars game made by Brisk T where you just slash, Brisk. It's kind of similar to Fruit Ninja. You also slash droids and stuff. I think the Brisk was a bonus power-up. It's been a while since I played it. But eventually that iPod did break. It still works, but the screen doesn't. I've shown it in that video I did a while back called Gotta Love Technology. The screen is very fucked up on it, but it's essentially made it into an iPod Shuffle, so I still got all the music on it. Unfortunately, it does not have a working screen, so I can't actually use any of the games or apps on it, which is a damn shame. It's definitely something I will never get rid of, even if it ceases to work entirely, because it's a huge nostalgic part of that work shift for me. I'm just listening to the music on it, watching Beavis and Butthead videos on it when I was working, because another thing I would do is when there were no customers, I'd take it out and I'd watch YouTube, and I'd watch Beavis and Butthead on YouTube and stuff like that with it, which is how I watched a lot of the episodes that never got released on DVD. And again, I have seen the entire series at this point. But that's how I watched a lot of them, because at the time I only had the Mike Judge collection. I think I did get the history of Beavis and Butthead while I was still working there, but I can't say for sure. It might have been after that, after I got my next job. I still keep that iPod with me, because it's a part of my past, and it's something that I hold dear. It's one of my most prized possessions. Just a shitty old iPod that has its original owner's name engraved on the back of it. Yeah, it just has some guy who I've never met, who my brother bought it from. It just has his name engraved on the back. And it had a pink case that I would cover it with. But eventually I stopped using it because the button, the power button's kind of broken and it would stick if it has the case on. So it had all sorts of problems. It has a dent in it where the volume buttons kind of poke out and protrude. But the fact that it works at all is a miracle. That thing has taken so much abuse over the years. But yeah, that's this episode of Tales from the Drive-Thru. My good old iPod. I love the thing. If I could ever fix it and make it work properly, I would. Hell, maybe I'd even do a video showcasing some of the old shit I have on it. I think that'd be an interesting thing to do. But unfortunately, it doesn't look like I'll ever be able to get it working, because I don't know anywhere that'll actually fix it. And if they are going to fix it, I don't want them to erase the memory either. But yeah. That's the story of my iPod. Hopefully it was entertaining, and I'll see you next time. Doodles.
I'm gonna fucking die here, Jack!
You're watching Fugitive Red-Eye, and welcome to another exciting episode of Tales from the Drive-Thru, the series where I tell the many stories of things I experienced in the workplace over the years. In today's episode, I'll be talking about a job that I had as a temp. You see, my current job that I have, I found through a temp agency. But prior to that, I had done some other work with the temp agency. And the whole timeline of it all is a bit complicated, but we're not going to get into that. Point is, while I was working for that same temp agency, I went to a different warehouse than the one I'm working at now for a while. And at this other warehouse, I was working a morning shift, whereas I currently work a night shift. Now, at this other warehouse, the first day that I worked there was actually for their afternoon shift, where I left at 6. But I only did that for one of the days, where I went in at 2 and left at 6. And then I went back later the next week and went for the morning, and I was there for 2 months. Now, the morning shift and the afternoon shift at that particular warehouse were two completely different shifts. I only did the afternoon shift twice. There was the one time where it was my official shift while I was a temp there, and then there was another time where I stayed and did both shifts that day. But essentially, what I would do in the morning shift would be I would go through packages, and depending on the day, I would either make sure that I would either put things in their packages with the pick slip, look at the products, put them in the box, and tape it shut. Along with the bubble wrap and all that stuff. The other job I would do is I would sometimes be the checker. So someone else would put all the stuff in the box, and then it would be my job to check and make sure that it was all correct with the pick slip. There were several companies that we had products for there. After a while there, though, I was given range of 3 particular ones. There was a watch company, there was protein drinks, and coffee. The work itself wasn't particularly hard. I was working for a manager there, this guy with a mullet and a flannel plaid shirt. We'll call him Rusty for the sake of this video. Rusty seemed like a pretty cool guy when I first met him. And we got along pretty well for the most part. One thing he would constantly do is he would come and ask me what I thought of other temps that were working there. And I myself would only ever come up with positive things to say because, well, frankly, when the manager's asking you about the performance of another employee, I'm not going to be the one who gets them canned. I worked with a lot of older Hispanic ladies. They were the primary, work group there. Sweet ladies for the most part. But sometimes they would say weird things to the manager, they said that I was making a lot of weird noises or something at one point, when literally all I was doing was, yawning. Really simple shit. But they, would keep telling him about it as if it was, a major health concern. I don't get that. We also had one shipment where there was a lot of issues, where there were 19 coffee machines written down on the inventory, but there were actually only, 6. That was a whole big thing. And they tried to kind of pin that on me almost. It was really stupid. So what happened was they had a few of us taking inventory, and while we were taking the inventory, there was a discrepancy there. I was one of 3 people taking the inventory, and the coffee machines were not on mine, so I don't know why they tried to fucking pin it on me. Rusty himself didn't let me recheck the inventory with everyone else. I'm like, okay, fine, you want to fucking let everyone else do it then. Because, well, frankly, I wasn't going to argue with it, even though I knew for a fact it wasn't my fault. It was one of the ladies I was working with. I wasn't going to be that guy. After a while, Rusty kept trying to pin it on a temp that had actually recently been let go there, I think to try and make it easier to have a record of it, because that way that guy was already gone. One thing he would always do is whenever he was going to let someone go, he'd tell everyone who worked there that that person is not going to be with us after that day. Which I think is a little slimy, that he would go and tell everyone that when they were being let go. He wouldn't tell the other person because he expected an honest day's work out of them, and I kind of get the logic behind that. But I'm going to expand on that a little bit more when I get to the end of this story. Other than that inventory discrepancy, which eventually everyone got over and everything was fine, I thought everything was good, and I never was given any inclination otherwise. Like I said, this guy was very pleasant to your face and acted like everything was fine all the time. But then one day, I was training a new temp, so things went by a little bit slower than usual. I expected that, because I was training a new temp. And this new temp and I were working on the 3 different companies that I always boxed up for. Here's the thing. Normally I had more competent help, but he wanted me to train the new people on it because those 3 companies were smaller than the biggest company, even if you put all 3 together. And this was my last day there, by the way. So after that, things took a little bit longer than usual, and I fully expected that, and I didn't think that was a big deal. Rusty came to me and said, that should have been done a lot faster. I'm like, yeah, okay, I understand. And he's like, especially with 3 people. And it's like, well, I didn't have 3 people until the end. Only sent 3 people when there were only 2 hours left, I didn't go and bring all that up and be super belligerent about it. And then he's like, okay, we'll see you tomorrow. And he said that. He said, see you tomorrow, implying that everything was fine. And when I got home, I got a call from the temp agency about an hour after I got home, basically telling me that this guy Rusty didn't want me back there. And I'm like, what the hell? And he's like, and the temp agency, they were also like, what the hell? Basically, what had happened was he had told them that I was no longer meeting their expectations. And he said that I had an attendance problem. And admittedly, there were a few times where I had been, 5-10 minutes late. But I never missed a day. And that wasn't every single day either. That had only happened a couple of times. And he never once told me it was a problem. In fact, one time he did ask me about it, and I said, I'm sorry, I'll improve it. And I did. But then I happened to be late on that specific day. Again, this is not a regular occurrence. This was just a few times out of the whole 2 months I worked there. And it was just because I was getting used to the whole morning schedule. And I happened to be late that one particular day when he decided not to have me come there anymore. Now, granted, if it had just been, if he'd have told me, hey, I'm sorry, we're not going to be needing you anymore, I wouldn't have been so salty about it. But I was really pissed off because this fucker told me, okay, see you tomorrow morning, and then went and told the temp agency they didn't want me anymore. It's like, dude, what kind of fucking pussy do you have to be when you can't just fucking tell me to my face, hey, we're not going to need you? Because if he'd have done that, I'd have been fine. Again, his reasoning was he said that I was no longer meeting their expectations just because I took a little bit longer one day because I was training a new person who he threw on me without giving any sort of training himself and expected me to be able to take just as long as I normally did with the 3 to 4 people that I normally had when it was just me and this one new person. So, yeah, that guy was a two-faced piece of shit. I really hope that he has a high turnover rate because he deserves it. But, yeah, he was a prick. But, yeah, that's all I really have to say about that. That was another manager I had there. I finished out that week at a different place on the temp job, but maybe I'll talk about that in a future episode. That one will be a lot more pleasant because there wasn't any issues there. Yeah, that's that story. See you later. You're watching Fugitive Red Eye, and welcome to another episode of Tales from the Drive-Thru. I'm using a different editing software today, so apologies for the watermark, but I'm still testing out the free version to see if I like it. But anyway, the topic of today's video goes back to when I was working for the temp agency, which again is how I found my current job, but I am no longer a temp there. And that's going to be talking about the week that I worked at a makeup warehouse, and what I was doing was taking the items that people had picked to put in the boxes, checking that the number of items was correct, and then putting them in the box and taping them shut. The position I was in was called packing, whereas the position where the people went and took the items and put them, arranged them to be put in boxes is called picking. They were supposed to train me on both, but they only ever got around to training me on packing because they're very disorganized there. And I absolutely hated working there because of the disorganization. So other problems there were often too many of the workstations were full. The packing stations were always full when I got there, because they didn't train enough people on picking, so everyone was in the packing stations, so I didn't have a place to work when I first got in there. So what I would do is walk up to what they call the wave plan desk, which is the people who are supposed to organize and help you if there's problems and things like that. And they would basically tell me, oh, well, wait a few minutes, they're going to be moving some people, or some people's shifts will be ending. Well, those few minutes would often turn to 45 minutes where I'd just kind of be walking around the warehouse, heading to the bathroom, heading to the drinking fountain, and then walking around in circles until I got a free packing station. Another problem with the people at the wave plan desk is they really didn't like to do their fucking jobs. So I'd go up to them and tell them, hey, there was a problem in here, there's not enough items, and they'd often give me attitude before actually getting it for me. And they'd take a while before they actually got around to helping me with it, to the point where it got easier to just say, fuck it, I'll just send out the wrong package and just call it there. Like, I'll just send it out with missing items. It was also very strict there. They treated you like you were a fucking high school student. Like, they had these metal detectors you had to go through. You had to show them your pockets. The phone was not allowed in the warehouse at all, so you couldn't bring your phone into the warehouse. You had to either leave it in the office, where they left it unlocked and any munchkin could get to it, or you'd have to leave it in your car, which if it was, hot outside, it could get too hot and cause problems with the batteries, and if it was too cold outside, it could get too cold and cause problems with the batteries. On top of that, you weren't allowed to go to your car on your 15-minute break. You could only go to your car on your 30-minute lunch. And you couldn't leave the parking lot on your 30-minute lunch. You couldn't just go off and go somewhere, which was just ass backwards to me. All of their vending machines, they replaced with these things called company kitchens, where you had to have a company kitchen card that you had to preload with cash in order to use. Like, granted, I think I could have probably used a debit card on the company kitchens, but I didn't have a debit card at the time, because as I said, this year is the first time I've had a debit card. They didn't really let you talk to people there either. Like, I'm sure there was no necessarily rule against it, but it just kind of felt like they didn't want you to do it. They also didn't let you bring in outside drinks other than water, and it had to be in a clear bottle. It couldn't be like, an opaque bottle or a different colored bottle. It had to be a see-through clear bottle. And you could bring in hard candy, and they were very keen on telling you were allowed to bring in hard candy. I don't know why, but they really wanted to drive it home that you were allowed to do that. Often some of the products wouldn't fit in the boxes, and you were supposed to ask some of the maintenance crew for boxes. I don't know if that's what their official title was, but they were the people that walk around helping you if you need something. And they wouldn't give you boxes a lot of the time. Like, they'd take forever to do it, and they'd never be around, so that was a hassle too. But yeah, overall, there's a reason I only lasted a week there. That makeup company was fucking garbage. I was working 10-hour shifts, 4 days a week with 3 days off. So I mean, granted, having the extra day off was nice, but the 4 days a week, 10-hour shifts were pretty bad. It was like 4 p.m. to 2 a.m. And I was just like, yeah, I'm not gonna do this. So I quit doing it after a week. So yeah, it was not very good. But ultimately, I did go back to working at other places, which is how I wound up at the place that I talked about last time with that two-faced manager. I think next week I'll probably talk about another one of the places I ended up, but I'll see you then. This has been Fugitive Red Eye. You're watching Fugitive Red-Eye, and welcome to another episode of Tales from the Drive-Thru. As I said last time, today I'll be talking about the job that I had for 2 days after the job I worked with the manager we call Rusty, who didn't like me for some reason. Today I'll be talking about a job I worked for 2 days, and I worked in a fan warehouse. I know, I've worked in a few different warehouses. This fan warehouse I only worked in for 2 days, and I didn't actually do any of the packaging or anything like that. This one was a lot more big, like, industrial type stuff. Like, there was a lot more heavy machinery in this warehouse than any of the other ones I've worked at. It was also just a much bigger place. It was a fucking huge warehouse. But my job there was a 2-day assignment. From what I understand, it was actually a week assignment, but, I came in for the last 2 days because it was a Wednesday when Rusty said they don't want me no more. Now, what that assignment was to clean up and move the warehouse, in a sense. They were basically shifting several things back quite a bit to kind of reorganize the warehouse. So what that entailed was taking down those big... Have you ever seen those industrial-sized shelves that are like these big metal racks? They're really tall. They look kind of like a bookshelf or like a, almost like a kitchen shelf, but they're fucking huge. Like, they're gigantic. We had to disassemble those and reassemble them in different areas. That's what I was doing for the first day of the 2-day assignment. I'll get to the second day in a moment. So, there was a manager there I was working with. We'll call him Tornado, because that's actually part of his nickname that he was given to him, I guess, according to another guy I was working with there, who was kind of like the assistant manager, kind of. Or at the very least, he had some sort of authority, because he kind of took over when Tornado left. We'll call the other guy Bill, I guess. I don't know, we'll go with that. But Tornado was this older guy. He had like a warehouse, like, dust apron or vest type thing that said no whiners on the back of it, which I thought was kind of funny. Like, very old-fashioned type guy. I remember there was a lady there who asked if I wanted gloves, and he's like, "What are you trying to do, make my men soft?" And it was really funny. Like, obviously, he wasn't serious about that, but still. And the reason Bill told me they called him Tornado was because, he'll ruffle some feathers, but he'll get shit done. I don't exactly understand the analogy there, because a tornado, like, is destructive and destroys shit. I mean, maybe it's like, oh, he destroys it. He gets the job done. But it's like, the way he explained it didn't really make sense. For about the first half of the first day, Tornado was there running the show. But the second half... it was mainly just Bill, which was good because Bill was a lot more chill and definitely let a lot more shit slide. The second day, I was completely on my own, but again, we'll get to the second day in a second here. But yeah, on the first day, pretty much all the day was spent disassembling and reassembling these giant industrial-sized shelves. We used a scissor lift to get up to some of the higher parts to, screw in stuff or unscrew stuff. I guess another way I could explain these shelves is they're a lot like scaffolding. That's a good way to put it. They're very similar, but they're like permanent shelves in a sense. Some of the shelves we needed to get additional pieces because they were adding on to it and expanding it a little bit too. So we had to go out to the dumpster and find some old pieces of those shelving units, which were filled with bees, so we had to get hornet spray to spray at them so that they wouldn't bother us, so we could kill them off, because apparently they set up like a little wasp's nest inside one of those shelving things. One thing that was really interesting about this job is they gave us a 15-minute break and a 30-minute lunch. However, the 30-minute lunch was actually a 45-minute lunch, and they paid us for half of it. That was really cool. I've never seen a place that does it like that. Because the 15-minute break was paid, and then half of a 45-minute lunch was paid. That was pretty cool. When I went on the lunch break, I went across the street to a gas station that was there, and this was the only gas station I've ever seen that has apple beer on their fountain. So that was really cool, because apple beer is a really tasty soda. If you've never had it, it's pretty good. It's considered kind of a premium soda, because it's typically only sold in glass bottles and cans. But apple beer is very foamy, so you can only fill it up maybe 2/3 of the way, and then it's just got kind of a head on it, like a beer does, even though it's not a beer. Hence the name apple beer. Anyway, yeah, that was really cool. It was the only gas station I've ever seen that actually had apple beer on on their fountain, just with the regular drinks. This was one of those warehouses that required you to wear safety goggles the entire time you were in the warehouse, as well as a bright orange reflective vest that said visitor or temp or something like that, I can't remember. It basically said requires escort, because you can't go in and out of the warehouse willy-nilly, you have to go in with an employee. Because I was a temp, again, this was also for the same temp agency. One of the guys that was working there, we'll call him Chad. Apparently Chad had been there quite a few times for a temp agency, and apparently they have these few days or week assignments regularly. He was telling me about that. So I guess that's kind of just a normal thing they do there. They'll have a few temps just for a few days and then be done with them. And he's done that multiple times. So yeah, the first day, like I said in a nutshell, was cleaning up and then disassembling and reassembling those big shelving units. The second day, I was literally just given a broom, taken out to the parking lot, and said, sweep all day. So literally, I was just out there sweeping the parking lot all day, sweeping the back lot all day, which has like big dumpsters and stuff. A lot of dust and garbage back there, so a lot of work. But I was doing that all day out in the hot sun, so that was very hot. But for that second day, for most of the day, I was completely and totally unsupervised, just out there sweeping the lot. And then Bill would call me and tell me when it was time for a break. There were a couple of moments, I'm not gonna lie, where I would go in the dumpsters had these weird, like, docks that they would slide into, where it's like this big tunnel type thing where the dumpster would slide in. I would stand in some of those to, like, catch my breath and stuff, because it's in the shade in a sense. And there was a lot of this weird, like, insulation type foam on the ground all over inside those things. I think it was, like, built up sawdust that had, like, kind of gotten all stuck together, but there was a lot of it. Because there was a lot of sawdust there, as you can imagine. Then at the end of that day, I was down to, like, my last 30 minutes. Bill came out and got me, brought me inside, and had me sweep out one of the inside areas until the time was up. He did let me go maybe 2 or 3 minutes early and still put me down for the full time, but he had me inside sweeping and stuff in one of the inside rooms until the shift was over. But yeah, it was a very simple job, but again, it was only a 2-day project, and also not exactly the most exciting story, but hey, I said I'd tell it, so I told it. I hope you've enjoyed. This has been Fugitive Red-Eye. Have a good one. You're watching Fugitive Red-Eye, and welcome to another episode of Tales from the Drive-Thru. It's been a fucking while since I've done one of these, hasn't it? And in today's episode, I'm going to be talking about something involving the job I currently have, but not actually when I was there. So one of the old managers who used to work at my job, I've heard nothing but horror stories about working with him. I've heard he was a real hard-ass, like he would scream at people just for them trying to explain something to him or to talk to him or do anything. He didn't let anyone take breaks. He was always just shouting and being a total dick, right? Like, I've heard nothing but bad things about this guy. The only positives I've ever heard, people saying he got shit done, but I would hate to work in that environment, and if I'd worked with this guy, I would not have lasted in that place. Yeah, apparently this guy also, like, damaged some of the stuff in the warehouse by moving stuff with the forklift. Like, we have these rollers that pull out into the trailers that we're loading, right? Because we load boxes into trailers. And there's these rollers that we pull out, and he couldn't get them to fit into the place where they roll up into. So, like, there's higher up rollers that go down, and then there's, like, a smaller thing of rollers that pulls out, right? And the higher up ones is where the smaller ones slide into. So he used the forklift and shoved it and damaged it. So now the higher rollers are unsafe. And apparently they've been like that for a while. Because again, this guy was there before I even started. And those rollers have just been like that the whole time. So we're actually getting them fixed finally. We haven't been using them. But this guy, he did that. And he fucking he crashed into him with the forklift and just kind of left him there like that, not telling anybody. But he actually got fired for stealing from the company, right? Like, he was just stealing stuff out of the trailers from the company, and he finally got caught doing it. I think he stole a laptop that was, like, put in there as a sting to, like, catch whoever was stealing the shit. And then he got fired. And then I started working there shortly after that. So this was about 4 years ago or so that this guy had worked there. But turns out, not that long ago, I don't know if it was this year or last year or whatever, this guy actually killed his wife. Like, legit, he got into a fight with his wife and he killed her. And so just hearing about that from someone who worked where I work, it's insane, like, to think that someone like that was there. I mean, anyone's capable of murder. Like, you never really know with that sort of thing, obviously. But it's just a weird thing to think about, that this ogre of a manager that luckily I never had the misfortune of dealing with, not only damaged some shit at the warehouse, stole from the company, then fucking killed his wife, and then had a shootout with the cops. I think he's in prison, he might be dead, I can't remember which. Someone was telling me about it, and then I looked it up, but I don't remember all the details. It's just an insane thought. But yeah, that's really this one. Maybe not as fun as some of the other stories, but I thought it was one worth mentioning. Anyway, this has been Fugitive Red-Eye. Have a good one. Toodles.
I had to suck 5 dicks to get into this show. Let's see you top that.
Sup, bitches.
You're watching Fugitive Red-Eye, and welcome to another episode of Tales from the Drive-Thru. That's right, Tales from the fucking Drive-Thru. Been a while since I've done one of these, hasn't it? In today's tale, I'm going to talk about a couple of things from my current job. As you guys know, I'm currently a supervisor at a warehouse. I've worked at this warehouse for around 5 or 6 years now, and I've been a supervisor for around 2 years. I have in the past told the story about the manager who used to work there that killed his wife. That's in the episode Murderous Manager. Check it out if you haven't already. But today I'm going to talk about the driver from hell, as I like to call him. Because as working in a warehouse where we ship freight, I constantly have to deal with drivers going to the other facilities and taking our loads. But a lot of these drivers meet point drivers at a halfway point between where they're going. So we have a run that goes to Vegas, a run that goes to Reno, a run that goes to Denver, and so on. The Reno driver in particular is the one I'll be talking about. Now, the driver that I meet on my end is no problem. I've never had any issues with him. I've had multiple drivers on my end, which we'll get to in a minute. Now, with the Reno drivers, I've had some that have been great, some that have been kind of frustrating. As far as the ones on my end, like I said, we will get to the one on the Reno end that meets at the halfway point. But before we get to him, I'll talk about some of the other drivers I've had. We had one that was always particular in trying to tell me how to load the trailers. It was really frustrating because he seemed to not understand the fact that there is a particular way the company has me load trailers. They have me load in what they call brick load, which is the freight stacked in sort of a Tetris style, right? Back, left to right, up to the top. And then we have pallets that we load in after that. He seemed to think that I could decide when to load in those pallets and stuff, which is simply not the case. Regardless, I found ways to work with it most of the time, but essentially, when you're pulling a triple set of trailers, the back one is always going to sway a little bit. That's just the way it is. This driver also didn't like using the scales to weigh the trailers. He preferred to try and say, it's all about where the weight is distributed between the trailers, rather than the actual weight of the trailers themselves, which, by the way, the standard we go on is weighing them, although at the time that wasn't necessarily the case because there were issues with the scales back then. We weigh them all now. Whenever we do triple set, that is a requirement. But that was the first Reno driver I had. He was an okay guy, but very picky and liked to complain a lot. After he left, I got another driver who told me about the meat point driver being a pain in the ass and being very particular with the way he wanted the forms filled out. He also complained a lot about the other drivers being late and stuff, even when it wasn't their fault. Like, even when it was an issue on the part of my facility, he would bitch at the other driver for being late and also throw a fit. The first driver that I had, one other thing I neglected to mention, there was a time when the highway was busy, so he literally just told all the other drivers to just wait and not leave yet, which obviously pissed off management at my warehouse. But anyway, back to the meat point driver, right? This guy, every driver he has dealt with has had trouble with him. He yells at him, he's a total dick, he'll constantly say he'll refuse to take the set, things like that. Total fucking drama queen. So, he scared off the first replacement driver that I had heard talking about how awful he was. He scared him off, made him quit. Then there was another driver I had temporarily who would actually later come back, but that other driver was just there to fill in the spot until they got a more permanent one for that run. Well, the more permanent one actually lasted for quite some time, well over a year. And so far, he's the only one that seemed to be able to tolerate dealing with the other guy. Despite the fact that he could deal with him, he constantly told me how terrible he was. Eventually, that driver left, and then I got another one that lasted for a few months, who did fine because we were doing double sets for a while. But as soon as we started doing triple sets again, the complaints started coming in from the meat point driver. This new driver kept claiming he was able to handle it and it was fine, and he kept saying how, oh yeah, I'm starting to get the hang of this other driver and deal with him. Which, by the way, this other driver constantly tries to tell us to do things with his sets that are actually illegal to do, like sending 2 long dollies with his set. You can't have 2 long dollies with a triple set. It makes it too long to legally go on the road. So he constantly would do things like that. And it started to drive this new driver insane, even though he claimed he could handle it, but then one night he just up and quit and never came back. And so ever since then, I've been having to have one of the higher-ups of that trucking company actually do the deliveries. Like, we don't have the drivers, we have one of their higher-ups doing the driving. So that's been really frustrating. I mean, granted, it's been fine for me because it doesn't really affect me, but I can't imagine how irritating that is on the guy who's having to fill in right now, because he's not a driver typically. Like, he's trained to drive, he's driven, but he's supposed to be there running the company. So he's getting fucked over because of this one asshole in Reno who scares off all my other drivers. But that's really it for the driver from hell. It might not be the most interesting story, but I decided to tell it here. Now we're going to move on to something a little bit more fun, the Phantom Shitter. So, this also has to do with truckers. If you guys don't know, truckers can be kind of gross sometimes. pissing in bottles and just setting it in the parking lot. I've talked to people who are truckers that have told me this, how if they'll piss in a cup and they'll just set it next to their truck. They don't want to throw it, they don't want to arouse suspicion, but they gently set it on the ground after they piss in a bottle. It's one thing that you're pissing in a bottle, but it's another thing that you're just leaving it in fucking parking lots, right? I have seen these piss bottles left in the parking lots at my warehouse in the past. It is not pleasant. But this takes it to a whole other level. This is what we like to call the phantom shitter. Now, there was a good, month where there just kept being feces found near the warehouse. And eventually we found out it was one of the drivers that was doing it. There's not really much more to it than that, but it is still worth mentioning because it's fucking gross. Just popping a squat in the middle of a fucking parking lot. Like, who does that? The next thing I'll bring up is we've actually had plenty of temps come in to the warehouse that were clearly, crackheads or meth heads or whatever. Because we've had all these fucking tweakers come into the warehouse, we did actually find some fucking syringes and spoons in the garbage can in one of the bathrooms. We don't really use temps anymore, so that hasn't been a problem in a while. Again, a lot of small little tales here, mostly about the driver from hell, but the phantom shitter and the crackhead temps are interesting enough as it is as well. But I think that does it for this episode of Tales from the Drive-Thru. I hope you've enjoyed. Have a good one. Toodles.
Fuck it. We've come this far.
Your Olympic hero has arrived. It's true. It's true.
Watching Fugitive Red Eye, and welcome to another episode of Tales from the Drive-Thru. Today we're going to have Corbin tell us some tales from his workplace experience. So I turn the floor over to you, Corbin.
Alright, now I'm going to say nothing for an hour. So I guess I should say the most interesting thing that happened while I was working somewhere.
Yeah, you can do that.
So when I worked at the dollar store, or it was a Dollar General, not a dollar store, because Dollar General oddly isn't a dollar store.
Correct. Neither is Family Dollar.
Yeah. And when I was working there, they gave me they didn't give me the register key, but I had to work the register and I had to stock stuff. And then while I was working with 3 other female coworkers,
Shut up.
There's no reason for me to be on register and stocking. On the first day, it makes no sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, the manager gave me the register key, and she was really anxious all the time, get crazy, acting like she's gonna lose her job any second. As far as I know, she could have, I don't know, but she was hard to deal with, and the coworkers were very uninterested in their jobs. But they had register keys.
Okay.
What I understand is if they have register keys, why don't they, work the register?
Yeah, one would think that is what they would do.
Well, one time that I was working with one female coworker, and the other 2, I guess, didn't work that day. I don't know, but she just in the middle of the day, she was acting anxious, always on her phone, because I think she was in the middle of some conversation that was making her mad, and then she left with the register key, and it's coupon day. And you need the register key to do the coupon thing. And everybody has coupons on coupon day.
Hence the name.
And I'm just waiting there for half an hour while the people get mad at me. And one lady gets so mad and starts cursing at me, and then she goes in the bathroom and takes a dump on the floor.
What a nasty bitch.
And then after she takes a dump on the floor, I don't know about it until later on in the day. But she was just mad and said, there's always problems every time I come here. But if that's true, why the heck does she keep coming here? Just leave already.
Yeah, seriously.
But when the lady came back, she tried to make me clean up the poop in the bathroom, but I told her that it's lady poop, so she should do it.
Yeah.
And she says something about how a man is supposed to do it. I said, no, that's sexist. I believe in equality.
Throw that right back in their stupid fucking faces.
And then later on, there was one of the other coworkers told me that when she left, she went and like had sex with her boyfriend while I was working there by my literally without a register key. But that's why it's better not to work with females.
True.
They are a backward species.
They sure are.
Oh yeah, I got blamed for stuff I didn't do a lot. Like, they would just be like, why did you stock these pizzas in this part of the refrigerator? Pizzas don't go in this part of the refrigerator. It's like, when have you guys ever told me to stock things in the fridge?
Well, Corbin, why did you stock the pizzas there, huh? Explain that.
Okay, so the way the schedule worked was ridiculous. Like, the way the schedule was that I could just get work any random day of the week, and she would just call me and tell me when to come to work. And it's like, so like if she felt like I wasn't doing a good job, she could just tell me not to come. She'd just make me not work for like several days and not make money.
What a bitch. You could tell about that thing with your dad working at that Captain D's in the car.
Oh yeah, my dad was working when somebody literally crashed the car through the door of the Captain. No, it wasn't Captain D's. It was Long John Silver's.
Oh, okay. Yeah, they crashed the fucking car through the door, right? So.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
What I think is crazier is my dad, like, watching videotapes of himself wrestling for like hours. I mean, with my fencing job, the worst thing is just walking through big piles of manure that go on for like a long time.
That sounds awful. Isn't it also really strenuous back-breaking labor that you get paid fuck all for?
Yeah, I do not get paid very much money. Despite digging many holes every day that are like 3 feet, not feet, like
Is it like 3 meters?
Like very deep holes though, because you have to put the friggin' wooden posts in them, and the wooden posts are like the size of logs sometimes, because people think that, oh, if I get a bigger post, then that means better fence.
Seems pretty legit.
Which, like, pulling on the wire, the bigger post, it does not actually do that much. Also, people buy really weird insulators, like, the insulators are, like, for, like, the electric fence. But, if you don't get the right, they get, like, really cheap, crappy insulators all the time where they're, like, really weirdly shaped. And they used to come with the nails in the bags, but now they don't have the nails in the bags, and this is really entertaining.
Oh yeah, it sure is.
But also, like, working, like, sometimes you have to, like, when you have to, like, do, like, official work for the government, it sucks. Because everything has to be, like, literally perfect.
Right. No, fuck the government. I know, hot take.
But what's weird is, like, their idea of perfect is not, like, good. Like, if you actually know how to build a fence, like, you can tell that the requirements that they have you do are just not practical.
So just shit that doesn't make any sense?
Yeah.
Alright, is that all the tales you have for that segment, Corbin?
I'm sure I could think of more, but we can talk about something else while I think of it.
Okay.
I'm gonna fucking die here, Jack!
I'm a Michael Jordan.
I have the smoothest balls in Iceland.
You're watching Fugitive Red-Eye, and welcome to the Season 2 finale of Tales from the Drive-Thru. Season 2 is nearly 6 years in the making, because there was a lot more time between episodes, and it was a lot less consistent as an actual season than Season 1 was. But today is a very special episode in that we won't be telling a new tale, but we'll be taking a look back at the series and talking about its production, and kind of looking at it back as a retrospective and my memories of it. So, the whole genesis of Tales from the Drive-Thru, as you would imagine from the name, is that I worked at McDonald's for 3 years, from 2012 to 2015. The series has evolved to be much more than that, especially in Season 2, but with Season 1, the main goal was to tell interesting stories of my time working at McDonald's. Obviously, at McDonald's, I had a very different work ethic than I do now. I half-assed everything, like, I fucked around a lot. I got away with fucking murder when I worked there. Management wouldn't really say anything to me because they had a really high turnover rate where people would just quit left and right. So because I never fucking quit and I was basically always there on time, whenever I did step out of line, they didn't say shit about it. I started to use that to my advantage more and more as the time I worked there. It started out with me testing the waters. For the first few months I worked there, I was a model employee, and then as it went on, I would be more and more pushing my luck. Until eventually I found out I could get away with basically anything I wanted. I told customers to fuck off, I came in late. Like, granted, I was always there, and when I came in late it was rare, but when I did it with complete blatant disregard. I'd come in 10 minutes late pretty frequently for a while there, and they didn't say anything to me about it. But there were several times where I'd come in like 2 hours late, and they either wouldn't say anything, or they'd ask me, and I'd give some stupid answer. For instance, one answer, I literally told them I wasn't properly motivated to be there on time. Other times I would blow off days of work and be like, oh shit, was I supposed to be here? Which again, they let slide because I was there most of the time. I almost never missed a day except for when I did, right? I know that sounds like a contradictory statement, but I was there basically every day, and I had what they called open availability, meaning they could schedule me for any shift. Now that said, if they scheduled me a dual shift where I had to work graveyard and then morning, I either wouldn't show up for the morning shift or would come in several hours late. They stopped scheduling me dual shifts after a while. The pay there was fucking awful. I got paid like, I think $7.75 an hour when I started, and I was making like $9 an hour when I left. That is fucking awful compared to what I make now, or even compared to what I made as a temp at the warehouse I work at now. In fact, the reason I ended up quitting there is because there was a new hire that was making 25 cents an hour more than me on her first day, and I'm like, fuck that. I remember I found that out a few weeks later, but she had been making that much when she started, and I remember I treated her kind of like shit that whole day when I quit, because I'm like, fuck you, which in retrospect was me being an asshole. There was no reason for me to be a dick to her. That's what I ended Season 1 on, right, was talking about why I quit, but then throughout Season 1 I obviously talked about all the crazy shit I did, putting ketchup in the coffee machine, deep frying Happy Meal toys before they cleaned the fryer, messing with customers, which was a pretty regular occurrence, and for a while I double-teamed them with this one guy who would later turn into a fucking snitch and tattletale to me when we both vandalized a freezer in the back, and he got caught, threw me under the bus, and then I said, yeah, it was me, because I take responsibility for the things I do, right? They questioned me about it, and I'm like, yeah, of course. But I didn't throw him under the bus because I didn't know he did that to me, because that's how I am, I'm loyal. And I found out he was a piece of shit, but what happened was he got fired. I got told don't do it again or there'll be consequences. Which literally nothing happened to me. After that, they still wanted to make me a new manager, which I eventually turned down. Looking back, the job, honestly, I have some nostalgia for. It was a simpler time in my life. I worked a lot longer shifts, I made a hell of a lot less. My schedule was sporadic, and I never knew when I was gonna go into work until that week I would get the schedule. I had to deal with customers, but overall, I liked the job. Like, there are problems with it, obviously. It's not something I would want to do again, but as I've said before, I would go back to fast food if I was absolutely desperate. I would not go back to a call center, which is precisely where I went after McDonald's. Basically, once I found out that chick was making more than me, I couldn't stand to be there anymore. And it just so happened that as I was getting ready to quit, because the job was tedious and monotonous and I was getting tired of it anyway, that chick making more than me was just the straw that broke the camel's back. An old neighbor of mine actually referred me to the call center she worked at, so that she could get a referral bonus, which I, of course, jumped at the fucking opportunity because I wanted to get out of there. Turns out the call center was much worse, but we'll get there in a minute. I started the training at the call center, and I worked there for 2 more years. So, McDonald's 3 years, call center 2 years. Neither of these were actually my first job. I did a job as a newspaper deliverer for 3 months, which I covered in the Season 2 episode, Tales from the Paper Route. But I started at the call center, worked there 2 years, absolutely hated it. I was working at a call center taking tech support calls for Geek Squad over the phone. I didn't work directly for Geek Squad, but I worked for a company that actually went out of business, the call center. So the call center I was working at shut down. It doesn't exist anymore. But at the time, they were taking calls for Geek Squad. They've been around for a long time, actually. They used to take calls for all sorts of computer companies and shit. They've been around since like the 90s. But that call center did shut down, and I could see it as a sinking ship, so I jumped the fuck off there, because things were getting worse and worse. But basically, my job was to do computer tech support over the phone. And you know something? I knew fuck all about computers, but guess what? That doesn't matter, because what my job largely consisted of was telling people to restart their computer, restart their router, helping them install an antivirus, or transferring them to an online remote agent who connects to their computer. So what they would do is we have these things that would let you connect to someone's computer remotely. Scammers use the same exact technology to connect to computers. There's a bunch of different ones out there. There's LogMeIn Rescue, there's AnyDesk, there's TeamViewer, there's a bunch of them. We used LogMeIn Rescue, or a variant of it that was made for Geek Squad and was branded. I would connect to people's computers and I would do quick fixes and then transfer them to an online agent if they had tech support. If they had the tech support plan, then sending it to an online agent to fix it was free. It was included with their costs. So not free, but included, right? If they didn't, it's a fucking ripoff. It's like $145 to remove a virus. So fuck that. I would always tell people if they had a Windows 7 or higher computer, which at the time was what Microsoft would still support. In fact, they had just barely begun to phase out the support for XP and Vista when I started there. And for a brief time, I could actually still service computers with those, but they phased that out pretty quick after I started there. But if people had a computer with Windows 7 or newer, I would just tell them, take it into Microsoft. They'll remove the viruses for free, which they would. Now they only do it with Windows 10 or newer, and I don't even know if they do that anymore because I haven't had to do that in years. I actually took my laptop into Microsoft once and had them fix a virus for free, so that's how I knew that they would service it. But I would constantly tell people on the phone just how awful our company was, and you may be thinking, how'd you get away with that with QA? Well, luck of the draw. QA would only listen to calls that were between 3 and 45 minutes. Anything shorter than 3 minutes, they didn't check. Anything longer than 45 minutes, they didn't check. So if there was a call I wanted to not go and have them look at, I would just either get them off as quick as possible or extend it for like an hour. I'm not gonna lie, I hung up on a few people while I worked there. I told customers to fuck off a couple of times. It wasn't anywhere near as common as it was at McDonald's, but it did happen. I shit-talked the company like a lot. And while I was there, I had a bad habit of coming in like 5, maybe 10 minutes late, but I literally never missed a day. I requested off like maybe 3 days in my entirety working there, but I never missed a day other than the ones I specifically requested off. But I didn't get weekends off. What they had me do was I had Monday and Tuesday off, and then I worked Wednesday through Sunday, which is a double-edged sword because, you know, I wasn't off on the weekends, but on the plus side, whenever I went somewhere on my days off, there was a lot less people there because it was during the work week. Anyway, eventually I could see a sinking ship coming. They wouldn't even let me request weekends off, period, like when I needed days off. And that was kind of a deal breaker. They gave us this fucking class on things we're not supposed to say, which, you know, there was the common stuff like don't swear at customers, don't badmouth the company, that kind of thing. That was fine, I understood that, even though I did both those things from time to time. But one of the things they were saying not to do was to use phrases like, I think, or let me check, or phrases like, oh, my system is updating, or let me pull you up in my system, because we had to get people's information. They didn't want us to acknowledge that we were getting people's information to pull them up in our account. But at the same time, if QA picked up a call and you don't verify them within the first 2 minutes, they would dock you for that, and it's an automatic fail. So I brought up in the class, what exactly do you expect me to do if I can't say, hey, I'm trying to pull up your information, and I wasn't able to pull it up, and QA doesn't see that I pulled up their info in the first 2 or 3 minutes? How the fuck are they supposed to know if I couldn't do it? They're like, oh, well, just put it in your notes. QA will still auto-fail you for shit like that half the time, because the company is disorganized. They literally got rid of departments that helped people. For instance, there was a store escalation department, because let's say you go to a store at a Best Buy, because Best Buy and Geek Squad are the same thing. You go to a Best Buy, and the manager says, fuck you, get out of here, you're ugly, I hate you. And you want to report it to the company. Guess what? They got rid of the department to resolve issues like that. There was a department called Store Issues Escalation. They got rid of that department. So I had nowhere to fucking transfer people to when they had that problem. So when I had people call up and be like, yeah, these people in the store, they were super disrespectful, I'm like, well, I guess you're kind of fucked. The company doesn't have a department for that. Bye, and then hang up. Because I had no choice. There was no department. So I could see all of these problems racking up, and I'm like, fuck this. And so then I got a job going door to door for a solar panel company. That lasted all of a week. I realized how awful that was after a week. From there, I would later get a job at the current job I have, but through a temp agency. That's thanks to Danny, because Danny also did the door-to-door stuff. And then we went through the temp agency, and then I got the job where I am now, where I eventually got hired on and then got promoted, and have been there for around 6 years. There was a couple other temp jobs I did while my current job didn't have hours for temps at the time. I worked in a fan warehouse for 2 days. I worked in another warehouse for 2 months, but then the manager was a fucking two-faced asshole who told me, hey, yeah, come back tomorrow at 7. Then called the agency, and the agency called me and said, yeah, they said they don't need you anymore. Which I didn't even know we had a fucking problem, but then again, there was already an episode in Season 2. So, that's all my work history, right? Tales from the Drive-Thru started while I was working at the call center, and it was meant to tell the stories of me working at McDonald's. It evolved to have me telling stories of me as a customer at places, doing volunteer work, and eventually to talking about my other jobs, as I have in Season 2. Season 1 was made using something called Upload Studio, which you can't actually get Upload Studio itself anymore, but you can still use the game DVR that was tied to it. So it's on your Xbox One. There's this thing called Game DVR where you can capture gameplay footage. Now, back in the day, they used to only let you get 5 minutes. Now I think they let you get like 15. But you used to be able to get 10 through a glitch, so sometimes I would do that glitch to get 10 minutes of footage. And you can add voiceover to that footage in Upload Studio, which again, Upload Studio, as far as I know, no longer exists, so you can't add voiceover there. You'd have to actually have editing software now. But at the time, I didn't really have editing software. This was during Gen 2 of the channel, so obviously that was kind of the Upload Studio era where most of my videos were made either using Upload Studio or just raw videos recorded on my phone. Since I was using Upload Studio, I couldn't really put up relevant images, so instead I decided to start a tradition with it, which I have kept going to this very day. And that tradition is, I never use the same exact game twice for Tales from the Drive-Thru. I actually have a document with a list of every game I have played in a Tales from the Drive-Thru episode, or used footage of. So that way, I don't reuse my footage, and I don't reuse the same game. So there's a different gameplay footage in every episode of Tales from the Drive-Thru. That's just a little touch I've kept since the beginning, and I intend to keep doing so. Obviously, my games at the time were limited to Xbox One games because I didn't have a capture card. The only computer I had was a laptop, which was given to me by my college, and that's where I edited my videos on. And I didn't even really use that laptop until later on to edit. Like, I did occasionally splice the Upload Studio clips together in YouTube Video Editor before they got rid of that version of YouTube Video Editor. And the reason I did that is because you could splice clips together in Upload Studio, but it often crashed when you tried to do that. So I would make each individual clip 10 minutes at max in Upload Studio, and then splice them together in YouTube Video Editor if I had to. They were often like 5-minute clips or even less, but that's what I got in the habit of doing. And also, Upload Studio, I had no control of the volume of the games versus my voice, which is why there's always game audio in those early episodes from Season 1. Season 2 entered Gen 3 through 5 of the channel. Gen 5 is what we're on now. Gen 3 was when I started editing using Movie Maker, which is still what I use, because that's just the kind of guy I am. I use Audacity to record my audio and Movie Maker to edit the videos. But Upload Studio had little intros you could put at the start of videos, which I did early on, but kind of stopped as it went on. The mic I used for Season 1 was a headset mic. I think it was a Skull Candy headset, and the mic sounded like shit, and I'd put it really up close to my mic. I'd take off the headset and hold it up to my mouth and talk into it directly. So, in a lot of my videos from Gen 2, while I was doing that, you can hear me taking obnoxious breaths and stuff, because I didn't have a way to edit them out. But I always enjoy telling the fun stories of when I worked at McDonald's, and from other workplace stories, and other things that are similar enough to be considered part of the series. I never changed the title, because I think the title Tales from the Drive-Thru fits the series so well, and I've kept it. Every episode, I've also done a thumbnail where I would edit the Crypt Keeper into it in some way. There's other edits I do, some are more high effort than others. But one constant I've always had is to make sure that the Crypt Keeper is featured in the thumbnail. Because absolutely, it's Tales from the Drive-Thru, so you gotta have the Crypt Keeper. As Season 2 started, I eventually got the ability to record audio and video separately because, again, I use my computer to record stuff now. For a brief time in the early parts of Season 2, I actually recorded audio on my phone and then would email it to myself, and then download it onto my laptop, and then put it together with Movie Maker. But then later on, I would get my current microphone I use, which is a Blue Snowball mic, which, you know, is not the fanciest mic, but it's a $50 mic that gets the job done, and I quite like it. It does the job fine for me. For my purposes, it's perfect. 2016 had the highest amount of Tales from the Drive-Thru content, and then after that, it became more sporadic. 2017 was still fairly consistent with it until I finished Season 1, but there were literally 2 episodes in 2018, 3 episodes in 2019, 2020 saw a brief resurgence with a whopping 9 episodes. 2021 only had 1 single episode, and then this is the 3rd episode of 2023 with no episodes in 2022. So that's sort of the production of it. Tales from the Drive-Thru is a staple of the channel. Doing these episodes takes me back to the early days of my channel, and it's super nostalgic for me. I love doing it. I love sharing the stories of my different workplace exploits, and I plan on doing more with Corbin. Corbin did do 1 episode talking about some of his workplace adventures, and I thought of doing a viewer episode at one point too, but I never got around to it. But, could still happen. I plan to keep doing Tales from the Drive-Thru as long as I can find interesting things to talk about. But at the end of the day, when I've told so many, it starts to run thin where I start either repeating similar experiences or I just run out of ideas. Not to mention, McDonald's was 8 years ago at this point when I left, so a lot of that is not as fresh in my memory as it was when I started the series initially. Like, I remember very few of my coworkers from the time. Like, I remember some guys from the night shift who I considered friends at the time, and I hung out outside of work a couple of times. I remember this one guy on the night shift who was kind of a weirdo and kind of a two-faced asshole. I remember a few people on the morning shift, but for the most part, I forget a lot of them, to be perfectly honest. I remember all the managers, and I remember the ones that I worked directly with. And I remember what it was like working the cash register in the back of the drive-thru. And that takes me back. I do kind of miss that period of my life because things were a lot simpler. I didn't have as many bills to pay. I wasn't as informed in how fucked up the world is yet, so, I was blissfully ignorant. And at the end of the day, I had fun at work, which I still do sometimes now, right? Like, don't get me wrong. My current job I do like, and my current job is my most bearable job. There's still some fun stuff that happens there, and there's still going to be some tales from that. There's already a couple episodes where I've talked about stuff from my current job. Obviously, I'm not going to mention the company name, and it's funny because in Season 1 of Tales from the Drive-Thru, some episodes I mention McDonald's outright, other ones I don't, so it's kind of inconsistent on that. It's kind of funny when you think about it. But I would say out of all my jobs I've worked, my favorite is the current one I have had. It's certainly not my dream job. It drives me nuts sometimes, and there's a lot of things I don't like about it, particularly with management. I would say my most nostalgic jobs are McDonald's and the newspaper route. I also worked in a greenhouse. I forgot to mention that one. Back when I was in middle school, I had a school-related job where I worked in a greenhouse, and the most I got paid was like $45 for a month. Which at the time, I was happy about, but it's fucking literally nothing. Like, that's crazy to me, thinking about now. Because that's like $10 a week. But they paid you for what amount of work you did. And it was 2 class periods a day that I worked in a greenhouse, got paid for, and got science credit. That was my first ever job at age 14. Which in this state, you typically can't work until age 16, but I guess because it's a school job, there was different rules with that, and it counted as a class as well as a job. Another interesting thing about that job is they gave you $1 every Friday to use on the vending machine. But yeah, that was my first job, then the paper route, then McDonald's, then the door-to-door solar panel salesman, basically. Then temp work, which led into the current job I have now. But I would say my least favorite job was probably the solar panel thing. That one was pretty bad, because they straight up lied to me about how much I'd be making, lied to me about the quotas not mattering at the beginning, and wouldn't record shit that I did properly so that I didn't get enough credit. So that was pretty bad. I would say my second least favorite job was the call center. I would never return to the call center because call centers are fucking awful. I will never do that again. Anyway, I hope you guys have enjoyed this retrospective on the Tales from the Drive-Thru series, one of the classics of my channel that's, maintained its place, although, sporadically in the later years. But it is a remnant of Gen 2 that has made it this far, and we'll keep it going. I want to try and get some of my older series going again, like movies you probably never fucking heard of and a couple others. But obviously, I don't upload a lot of those series very often anymore, so we will try. But I hope you've enjoyed. I've rambled on enough. This has been Fugitive Red Eye. Have a good one. See you in Season 3, and toodles!
Subscribe, the Fugitive Red Eye.